What's up guys, today we're really going over the new seasonal exotic, the new Malpais, and seeing how good it is. This is going to be a Strand exotic rocket pulse rifle, and obviously we're going to be comparing it to the Mint Retrograde to see if it's actually worth using or not. So we will be breaking down all of its DPS and things like that, seeing which one is better, and finally ending the video with a pretty cool build to make either of these two weapons pretty strong this season. So starting off looking at the perks on this new exotic, first with atomizing rounds. Rounds fired embed themselves in targets, hold reload to detonate embedded rounds. Suspending blast, detonating a large number of rounds embedded in a single target will suspend them. So looking at all those different things in the game for this weapon, when you shoot at a target, the rockets themselves will not explode instantly, they will stick, and then over like 5 seconds they will naturally explode. But if you hold down reload, it will detonate all the ones you have stuck to a target, so you can do all the damage at once if you want. So you can stack up like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these missiles on a target, then detonate them all at once. And then the second part for the secondary perk, if you stack up to 2 shots worth, so like 6 of these rockets on a target and detonate them all at the same time, it will suspend them, which is pretty cool for things like Unstoppable. And the interesting thing about this weapon is it's a 320 RPM while the Mint is a 200, so it's not only an exotic, it's a totally different frame of these rocket burst pulses. So looking at damage of this compared to the Mint, first we gotta talk about how do we even do DPS with this weapon. Well, detonating them every single time after every single shot obviously isn't ideal. You want to detonate them at the end of the mag, or if you're doing a full like damage cycle on a boss, just let them naturally explode over time, right? For DPS, obviously make them all explode as fast as possible is better for DPS, but if you're shooting off your entire mag, you may as well just let them all detonate naturally. So generally you want to detonate them when it's enough on them to kill the target, or at the end of your ammo or magazine. And we look at the damage of one shot. It's only for 1605 on Carl. Now comparing that to the Mint Retrograde, and just looking at body shots, let's make it a little bit more simple. The damage is going to be a lot lower at 1323, but Mint has multiple different 35% buffs. One is one for all, or elemental honing, which will then take the damage up to 1782, already higher than the exotic. And looking at the DPS of one mag, the DPS was just under 1700, but once again with a 35% buff on the Retrograde, it's going to be just straight up higher at over 1800. And the final thing we can look at, and the one thing that the exotic does definitely win, is total reserves. Mint holds 18, and then the Malpais holds 27, which means the total damage is just frankly a lot higher at 43,000 compared to 32,000 in Mint. So that's the one thing where it just straight up is higher for damage. But in terms of single shot damage and DPS over one mag, your entire reserves, the Mint Retrograde is going to be way higher with a damage buff on it. Now if you're not using a damage buff on the Retrograde, then the exotic is going to be better. In terms of best case scenario to best case scenario, the Retrograde is going to be better for most things outside of total damage. So is it really worth the exotic slot? I'm not sure. I do really like the fact that you can kind of stack a lot of this damage at once and have really high bursts. That's pretty cool for champions. Champions have a narrow window of actually damaging them when they're stunned, and being able to stack up a lot of damage and make it burst all at once is pretty good. And given the fact that you can make this thing suspend, that's going to be really good for like really high health mini bosses or even unstoppable champions. It is pretty good, but it's not like mind-blowing better than Retrograde. So I think unless you have a free exotic slot, it's going to be hard to recommend this thing over the Retrograde, just because of how close they really are. And one thing definitely not helping the Malpais at all is the new artifact mod Energy Acceleration, which is kind of like Kinetic Tremors but for micro missile pulses or sidearms. And with this, it does work on the Retrograde as you expect, and it doesn't add like a huge amount of damage, but you know, it is some, taking the DPS to 1900 now. And this is just frankly not work at all with the new exotic, because it's not coded as a micro missile frame. It has its own frame that clearly isn't that, and so it doesn't work. But one thing that will help out the exotic is once we get the catalyst at rank 90 in the season pass, it'll make it so all of our explosions will unravel nearby targets, which is pretty good, right? So once again, overall, I think they are pretty close in terms of damage. And while there are upsides to the exotic, is it worth dropping a different exotic for this compared to just using Retrograde? That's a personal question to ask yourself. I think in most situations the answer is probably no, but I do think it is pretty good. And I found myself in the portal a lot last season, not using an exotic at all. I'd use a sword for Eager Edge, and I'd be using one like the Great Legendary Energy Primaries. And then I find myself using Retrograde or the Festival of Flight, the Solstice GL, and I found myself not using an exotic at all. So I definitely usually have an exotic slot. So for me, if I were going to be using a Rocket Pulse, I probably would throw this on. But definitely let me know down below what your thoughts are, if it's actually worth using or not. And moving on to the build, I'm going to be quickly going through this because it's not really a build that necessarily requires this exotic. It's just a really good Strand Warlock build that takes advantage of Strand weapons. And that's because we have a few new artifact mods that are really strong right now. First one being Threadling Proliferation, where dealing Strand weapon damage has a chance to spawn a Threadling. Defeating a Strand debuff target increases this chance. So this is pretty straightforward, just another way to create a million Threadlings in this build. There's gonna be so many different ways to spawn in Threadlings in this build. And as you do damage with the Malpais or defeat Strand debuff targets, you'll be creating them left and right. Then we also have Pack Tactics, where dealing damage with a Threadling increases Threadling damage at max stacks. Threadling stun unstoppable champions. So the way this works is when you do damage with a Threadling, you'll get 1 stack of the buff, which will be a 15% increase to Threadling damage. Then once you hit twice, you get the perk for like 5-6 seconds, and now it's going to be a 30% increase to Threadling damage. It makes the number actually glow yellow. And when you have the max buff, which just requires 2 Threadling hits, your Threadlings will then stun unstoppable, which is another way to stun those in this build, along with the suspending from the Malpais. And so overall, the goal of this build is to have a lot of suspending and a lot of Threadlings. And to start off with that, we're going to be using the exotic chest piece. Don't make me try to pronounce it. I think it's Greek. I'm not even going to try. But you guys know which one I'm talking about, the one on screen right now, where it's all about using arcane needles to suspend stuff. And then equally as important, defeating suspended targets will grant melee energy back. And what we're going to do is use Mind Spun Invocation with the Shackle Grenade to make it so all of our final blows will suspend targets. Along with the Fragment Thread of Mind, when we defeat these suspended targets, we'll also get class ability energy, which will feed into our second aspect, Weaver's Call. When we use our class ability, we'll create 3 of the Threadlings. And just in general, when we do damage, there's a chance to generate Perch Threadlings. And then to help get our grenade back, we have Thread of Generation. Doing damage will generate grenade energy. And then of course we have Thread of Evolution to make our Threadlings do more damage and travel a little bit further. Now our final fragment is going to be Thread of Warding to get Woven Mail when we pick up the Orbs of Power. And that's going to be important to feed into the top part of Shield Crush to increase our melee damage and the recharge rate. Then the rest of our artifact is the 2 new ones I showed off, then practically all of the Strand ones, plus Elemental Days. And that is pretty much it. I will put it up on screen right now, or you can always just click the dim link down below. And then looking at our armor, I think it's important to try to get melee, grenade, and class all to roughly 100, and then the rest should be in weapons and super. So ideally try to get all 5 of those stats pretty close to 100, which is definitely possible, but if you use fonts, it becomes a lot easier. So my armor, I have 100 melee, 100 super, and I have 80 grenade, class, and weapons, so I'm just using fonts to boost those up to 100. And then using a lot of ammo generation stuff just to enable myself to spam the Malpais as often as possible. And yeah, that is the full build. So the whole point is you eat your grenade to make it so all of your final blows will suspend. You use your melee to suspend also, and then killing all of these suspended targets will help get our melee back and our rift back. Our rift will create 3 Threadlings and send out all of our perched ones. All those Threadlings will do a lot of damage. You have Unraveling through your Arcane Needles. You have DR from Woven Mail. I use Healing Rift if I need healing, but overall most enemies in this build will be suspended, so nothing really ever shoots at you. You have great damage from your Threadlings and the Malpais. Then I usually run a demo primary in my energy slot just to help get back my grenade if I need to, but with Thread of Generation, doing all the damage to all the suspended lanes and all the threading damage, usually you'll get your grenade back by the time you need it. And then finally, I just have an Ear Edge Sword for movement. And yeah, the build is pretty good and really good this season with the artifact. I'm not sure it necessarily needs the Malpais. I think you can use really whatever Strand weapon you want in this build and it'll just be equally as strong. But yeah, definitely give it a try. I think that's me for the video. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.